Welcome to a live episode of Surviving the Survivor. We bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, SCS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. Steve Cohen's been on a roll, had a lot of new best guests lately, and there's a new excellent one today. We are here to discuss this really disturbing story about Hannah Kobayashi, who went missing on a flight from Maui. She was headed to LAX and then to New York City, and for some reason never made it from LAX to New York City. We'll get into the details as to why, and then a really tragic twist with her father reportedly taking his own life. He had gone to LA to be, try to help find her and be with her. I'm getting a crazy crackling on my end, so I'm gonna just hang on a sec, guys. Yeah, I'm gonna Doug and Rob, I'm just gonna have you guys mute yourselves if you're not talking, if you don't mind. I'd appreciate that. But speaking of that, best guest, you got Rob D'Amico, who he has served his country for 39 years as part of the FBI and also part of the military. He was an FBI special agent. He was assigned to infiltrate an organized crime family. He was chasing pirates around Somalia and other interesting things during his journey as an FBI agent. Next up, and new to the show, the best name among the best guests, Jim Nako Nolan. Go by Nako. How did you get the name Nako?
It's kind of a long story, but it goes back to my roots of being obsessed with the movie Jaws, which came out in 1776 BC, I think, somewhere. It's been a while. So,
yeah, it's been a while. But he was born, Jim Nako was born and bred in New York City in the 1970s. He decided early on that he wanted to make an impact on the blight and decay. And if you guys weren't in New York City in the 1970s, it was a scary place, man. My parents used to take me in there. There was the squeegee washers, the prostitutes walking the streets, and things got really cleaned up for a few years. And now some issues there again. But setting out to accomplish this goal, Jim Nako Nolan said, hey, I'm not going to be part of one, but two of the finest law enforcement agencies in the country. And so he is retired NYPD and LAPD. And he worked in a capacity in a special victims unit as a detective and as a detective on other things, which we'll find out about tonight. Last, but certainly not least, you see the timeline right behind him. That is Doug McGregor, better known as the Geo Profiler. Both he and Rob, soon enough, they'll be coming to our second channel with some shows of their own and their own specialties. But Doug McGregor is a forensic behavioral analyst. He's a consultant specializing in geographic profiling and linkage analysis for violent crimes and missing persons. And this would be a missing persons case. No doubt about that. So without further ado, I'm just going to go clockwise here. Doug, before I get into any of the details, I mean, what we know is that this is some are saying 31-year-old woman from Hawaii goes missing in LA. And last night I'm laying in bed, I get a tweet. I had to read it like 3 or 4 times, reading that her father, had jumped off a parking deck near LAX in an effort to unalive himself and was successful. I could not believe what I was reading. And what is your very macro, broad take on this story up to this point?
Up to this point, I mean, that was a shock. I read that as well. Obviously, it's a missing persons case. I'm sure LAPD is doing everything they can. And I mean, as we all know, adults are allowed to go missing. So they have to treat this as a missing persons case, follow the evidence. I'm sure they're looking into any digital evidence they can find, her timeline, any, interviewing the family and friends. And if they feel like it becomes a criminal investigation, they'll take it that direction. But with regards to the father, I would, as just with using the the information that's available publicly right now, if I was a consultant, I would loop that in with the entire investigation as a whole, because it's obviously it's related. If LAPD has evidence that it was an unaliving situation, that maybe there's video evidence, or maybe there's a note left behind, and they can confirm that, then they can, publicly state that, and they can move on and continue with the missing persons investigation for Hannah. But if they don't have that, it's got to be part of the larger investigation, because it could be related in another way that's not an unaliving situation.
Sorry about that. And guys, I'm just going to have you mute yourselves unless you're speaking, and I apologize for that, because it's I know it's a pain. This is just out of the recent stories we've done, incredibly bizarre. Nako, you were probably one of the very few people that was both in the NYPD and the LAPD. What do you make of the fact that her father, Ryan Kobayashi, he's only 58 years old. He was out there for about 13 days looking for his daughter. I have 2 daughters and a son, and I would be more interested in looking for you never know what's going on inside a person's mind. The bottom line question, Nako, is what do you make of the news when you heard that the father searching for his daughter decided to end it?
Well, I was in shock as well when I read that this morning. I woke up immediately and started reading the news, and my mind wasn't obviously kicking into full gear. And I automatically assumed it's amazing when you read something what your mind already thinks. I thought it was, she jumped off the roof, and then I had to read it again, and then found out, read it clearly, and saw what it was, his father. But it kind of leads to my assumptions of what I think is some kind of mental illness is on board, and that could be a family trait or something that's passed on, learned behavior. So it really made things even more clear of kind of what I'm assuming where this is going. So I was shocked, but not really surprised. But, as thinking about what my father would do if I was missing, I know he's not jumping off any roof. He's going to be throwing people off roofs, looking for information. So it's, people handle stress in many different ways, but I think as a father looking for a daughter, that's an extreme scenario. So that, like I said, that gives me circumstantial of where, like, hey, if something's going on with this family, and it's, horrible and tragic how that ended, but not surprised, especially it being an LA story. This is about as LA as it gets.
Yeah, by the way, Nako is coming to us from LA. And again, he was a member of both the NYPD and the LAPD, which you don't hear every day. Janet saying we don't know what law enforcement told him. And we'll get into the LAPD, because the family has not been thrilled, at least publicly, with how they've responded. And they've also reached out to Rob's old agency, the FBI. But Rob, before we get to any of that, this is a real mystery, at least to the public. So obviously we don't know all the information, but the family is saying that, they got strange texts, which we're going to talk about. She was not acting herself. There's a boyfriend involved in this. But again, from just a bird's eye view, Rob, when you read this story, were you kind of scratching your head?
I was. I can see them maybe not jumping on it this quick. I mean, LA has so many missing people that it kind of gets lost in the shuffle, and there was no indication, something happened at that point until they started getting the text. There's a couple of things. One, the boyfriend made the connecting flight. So they were together, they broke up, but since there were non-refundable tickets, they decided to fly that way anyhow together, but split the seats up. So they were sipping. Somehow he made the flight and she missed the next flight. So I don't know exactly what was behind that. The other strange thing was she was going around. She was seen in a YouTube video, a TikTok video at the shopping mall, and doing things there. Then she started sending some strange texts about Basically, someone she thought she loved getting money from her or scamming her out of all her funds. A couple things like that. And I think there was a Venmo payment or something along those lines, which all leads to digital evidence. So, it now gives the police at least somewhere to start looking cyber wise. Who did she send this money to, and start, putting the, search warrants out for the subpoenas for the emails and all these other accounts to start saying, hey, who was she texting, interfacing with? There's got to be plenty of cellular clues, both from commercial ID and cell towers and stuff when she was around, and looking who may have been, especially with commercial ID, you can look at who was with her at a certain time. And then if she was at another location, who also was there possibly. The father did, like, I did the same thing as Nako. I read it that she had unalived herself, or she was found dead. And then I saw it was the father. And I was same thing. Like, I can't imagine giving up the fight. I've met parents of missing children that 20 years later still think they're going to find them. And it's one of those things. But if you read the backstory of him and her, they were estranged. They weren't close. He hadn't talked to her in a long time. And he was trying to make it better. So I never put anyone in a category how they respond to horrible events. Some people, you think, like, they don't cry. Oh, they're guilty. How can they not cry? It's just, that's how they're handling it. So I never, after being in law enforcement like the other guys a long time, you never kind of say, this is how someone would react, because it's totally situational to that person and how they respond. I'd be, I'd probably be power and washing people's skin off, asking questions of where my kids were. But everyone responds differently. So it might have been the whole thing with his relationship and how he blamed himself or whatever. And it got too much because he didn't have anything after 13 days. But I would still keep it an open case, like I said, until you find some definitive proof that it was his act that did it. Because when you look at some of the scams that are going on, if they scammed her out of all her money, they may have then known the father was involved and scammed him out of money, maybe a meetup in a parking lot. And again, this is all hypothetical, but things that you want to still keep open. These scam artists try to scam a second and third time. Maybe they got a hold of him and said, hey, if you give us so much money at the, whatever it is, again, it could be far off, but you don't know until you know. So you have to keep it open, in my opinion. That's my 30,000 foot.
Yeah, and it's a good one. I appreciate it. Someone's asking, when did the word unalive become a replacement for the S word? It's a YouTube thing, because they don't like that word, and we try not to use triggering words. So, you'll hear essay instead of an actual assault, a kind of assault, things like that. So, again, I'm sort of dumbfounded. I'm not an investigator, but I'm the son of a psychiatrist and a licensed therapist. So I've heard a lot of strange things in my life, but this is up there. Doug, you see here, and this is a very difficult question to ask, but does Doug think there's a reason to suspect the dad? Before you answer that, you've got this. Someone saying she clearly had a psychotic break, cooler by the lake, any indication that the father was involved? I mean, you've got to ask these questions, don't you, Doug?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't mind answering the two questions there. I don't suspect the father of anything. It definitely could have been what it seems like, what it appears to be as an unaliving situation, internal conflict, catalyst, stress, anxiety, everything that goes along with that guilt. It could have been that, whatever was going on inside. But I'm also on the same train of thought as Rob is that, if there is a criminal act here and there was a person or group of people, targeting her, they could have been targeting the family as well. And then there may have been some other incident that was the catalyst that wasn't internal to the father. In terms of the psychotic break, I do see things in this case that are reminiscent of, a personal case of mine, and I can kind of relate to this case in a sense in some ways. I do have an uncle and a cousin who both had schizophrenic episodes and went missing, then unalived themselves. So in that sense, I can relate a bit to this case in some ways. And the texts that were sent, if they were sent by her, they do come off as episodic events. If they're out of the norm, if that is not what her family expects her to act like, to text, then it does come off as some kind of manic episode, possibly. And then you just ask yourself, does she have a history of this? Late 20s, early 30s is where schizophrenia, typically kicks in with females. So, it's something you have to look into. But in my experience with these cases, you always have to dig deeper. There's always more to the story with the family, whether it's something they're trying to keep back, withhold, hide, whether they feel guilty of something. It may not be that big. Maybe it's big to them. Maybe it is important. But in every case I work like this, I find you always have to dig deep, because there's always information that's being held back because there's some reason that they don't want to share it. So that may be the case. It may not, but it would be something that I would push to, find out.
Doug, hate to do this, but I think the audio issues on your side there. I don't know if you can switch headphones. Maybe there's just a crackle or something coming off of there, but I have figured out the source at least. So, Nako, to you. Look, you were both NYPD and LAPD, and they see, the craziest cases imaginable. There's so many angles to start with this one, but now that the father has reportedly unalived himself, does the investigation into Hannah intensify? Does this affect it? And what do you think the LAPD was kind of doing up to now? Because the family thinks that they weren't doing as much as they should have been doing.
You know what? Before I address that, I wanted to go and address something else that I was thinking of before. I think they probably have, and maybe they haven't, but I'd like to swim upstream to see what her airline etiquette was, what her airline diet was. I know I'm going back to New York for Thanksgiving, and someone just going on a red eye. And someone just said, "Oh, do you sleep? What do you do? And they said, "Oh, take gummies." And I know that's a huge thing now. Is a lot of people entering into this this drug of choice where they have they have no experience with that. They're like, "Oh yeah, take." Their friend just gives them a couple and says, "Oh, take these," and they don't give them anything how to's or any past experiences with it. So I'd love to know what she ate, what she ingested, if anything, and get her airline etiquette. Because as we know, like so many of these airline episodes nowadays that are going viral, it's a lot of it's due to these gummies, and these people are having these psychotic breakdowns, before and after and during these flights, and have no idea, no recollection. And I think that could be something to be looked into, and it might be a cause of this and what have you. And but as far as the father, does this intensify? It's like the other guys are saying, the LAPD missing person unit, I have a friend there, and they have about 2 or 3 investigators for the whole city. And the amount of people that live in the city and are coming to and from all the time, and these episodes are they're so common, and they don't have the resources to treat them as potential homicide investigations, which a lot of them really are. So by the time it gets media traction, or there are leads coming in and it's looking like it could be a bona fide crime or a homicide, they usually have to kick it over to our robbery homicide division, where they have very senior detectives and a ton of resources where they could dump 20 or 30 detectives all at once to chase these down. So I believe that's probably where this case is going to be going to, especially as the media intensity gets amplified. So they're going to have to address what happened with the father, if depending on what kind of video they have, concrete evidence that this guy did unalive himself or what have you, or they're going to have to dump his phone, and they're going to have to it's just going to really ramp up into now, 2, possibly 3 investigations all at once. Very complex, and like Doug was saying, so much digital evidence out there to sift through, and the resources at LAPD is shrinking by the day. And this investigation, I mean, you're going to need at least minimum 10 good solid detectives chasing down leads, and even that's not going to be enough.
Did I hear you right? Did you say for the entire city of Los Angeles, there's only 2 or 3 missing persons detectives?
Yes. And the amount of reports that come in a day, I remember just in my rookie days, I would get at least, just at the desk of a police station, I would take easily 2 to 3 in an 8-hour shift myself. So, they have to triage these investigations. I mean, especially where it's something like where it's an adult, it's not a child, and there's no evidence of someone snatching this person off a sidewalk, and where it's this gray area. Well, she hasn't called, she usually calls and texts, or phone's dead. Sadly, that's not enough to really ring the bell. So that's what they're dealing with right now. So I understand where the families, their the displeasure of dealing with the police department. And it's unfortunate, just due to a resource thing, and the amount of volume that's being kicked through the system is ridiculous. People have no idea.
Wow, that's an insane number, 2 to 3 for the entire city of Los Angeles. In comparison, do you happen to know how many New York City has for the NYPD, roughly?
Way more than that. More than that. I don't have a full number on that, but it's quite extensive.
Yeah. So a couple things to get through. So again, the father's name is Ryan Kobayashi. As you heard Rob D'Amico say, he was sort of estranged from his daughter, trying to make up for lost time. And then 13 days into the search, suddenly he is reported to have jumped off a parking garage near LAX. He's 58. She's 30 or 31. There's conflicting numbers about her age. And he's quoted just the other day as saying, there's a lot of people looking for you, Hannah. So if you get this, if you see anything, just go to the police, go to anybody. There's a lot of people out there that care and love you, Hannah. That's her father just a couple days ago. Kim says, my question did not get finished. Does Doug, but I'm going to throw this to D'Amico, think that the dad didn't jump on his own volition? Someone else here says, I do not suspect the dad. I think he met the killer. This takes on a whole layer of mystery, another layer of mystery, Rob. But what do you have to do? I mean, I'm assuming if the LAPD has publicly said that this guy unalived himself, that's what happened. But does more investigating need to be done in light of the current circumstance?
There is, but they may have it. I mean, the airports are well videoed, so they may have video in the parking garage or something along those lines that they're not releasing, that they made that statement, or it can just be like, hey, that's the normal thing, but hopefully they're still looking at all kinds of other information, witnesses or something like that may add to it. They don't have to come out and say it, but I think it would affect the case if they thought it was something else, or if the video, if they don't have any evidence pointing to it's definitely an unaliving situation, then I'd hope they just kind of keep that open. But it's everything you have to run down. Like I said, if it is involved in the case, it makes it a lot more complex. But then again, now you have other evidence to start putting into the case on everything else. There has to be now that they really have to be going down the electronic and cyber lanes now to be figuring out what's going on, where'd the money go from, who was she texting, and all that going on. And the parents released, I guess, on November 17th, a statement on Facebook saying she was seen around the metro near crypto.com arena. She's not alone and doesn't appear to be in good condition. So again, hopefully they're looking at that video and saying, okay, trying to identify how good was the video, can identify who they were with. Can you start now looking at the commercial ID data? I think someone asked what it was, and it's every phone has an ID. It's not to a number or anything. It's a long digit and an alphabetical number that identifies a phone for advertising purposes, and it tracks everywhere you go. Now, the federal agencies have a clause about not using it because there's a whole bunch of privacy stuff. So DOJ, FBI, they don't really readily use those. but state and locals have a different thing. So you can, it's not by the minute. Like you can't get, it's not real time. It's usually a 24 to 72 hour lag between when those, and this data leaks out of all your apps. When you sign an app and you sign these agreements, they are selling your data for a whole bunch of different reasons. And that data goes into advertising, how best to advertise with you, how best to use your information, but it's not specific of who you are. But if you have good analysts on how to use that data, then you can start narrowing it down, because it get very, very accurate positions. So you can start correlating, and then you can zoom in on one commercial ID, see who was around it at that time, and then go to another location on the map and see if any of those same commercial IDs are with it. And then you can start doing things like that. So it's complex, but when you have good analysts, it can really work in a case like this. They've done it for a whole bunch of different store crimes and tracking all those folks. So hopefully for a case like this, where there's a possible like life or death situation with her, that you can overcome any of the privacy things to use that data to try to find someone.
You see Hawaii's in the house here praying for Hannah and her Ohana. This reality and nightmare of theirs is unfathomable. Please send regards to the great islands of Hawaii for us. Doug McGregor, anytime we have these stories, I always ask you the same question. By the way, Doug is kind enough to have a timeline right behind him. So you see right there, November 8th, she lands at LAX, 9:53 p.m. November 9th, she returns to LAX. November 10th, speaks to the ticketing agency, but doesn't ever board. Then she's seen leaving on a Metro Pico Station. And November 11th, she's changing trains at the Rosa Parks Station. And by the way, that's the last day, November 11th, that her family hears from her, and they get some weird text messages, which we're getting to. But Doug, every time we do these stories, I ask you, where do you start? But I guess now that we're 13, 14 something days in here, what do you do if it's you and you're called on this case? What are you doing right now? Oh, you got to unmute. You got to unmute.
There we go. Hopefully my audio is better. Yeah. And before I get into that, just to give everybody an example of what Rob was speaking of, the MAIDS data, the mobile advertisement ID. I have a colleague in another country who located a body dump site strictly off that mobile ID, the advertisement data. So it does really come in handy if you can access it. Where do I start on this? If I'm coming into this case, first, I only work these kind of cases either independently or as part of a team that I'm work with if the police are involved, and they obviously are. You want to be very careful getting involved in missing persons cases where the police are not involved, because people can go missing for any number of reasons. So they are involved, which is a good thing. And you just want to start with the family and the friends, get the complete background. If you don't have access to if you're not also working with law enforcement, you don't have access to their investigation, then you just have to obviously rely on what the family has. But on the law enforcement side, as Nako said, with 3 people for, in their missing persons unit, I live in Ottawa, Canada, and we have 1 million people in our city, and our missing persons unit has 2 people. Not many cities have a dedicated missing persons unit. So with only 3 people in LA, they're really going to be chasing, because we've seen a few video surveillance clips of Hannah in and around LA. But the entire city's blanketed in video surveillance. But, Nako can attest, it's going to take them God knows how many hours to go through all that surveillance. They will be able to track her quite extensively, a lot more than we have publicly available, but it's going to take them a long time to go through that surveillance and track her whereabouts. So they're constantly going to be chasing. So on the family side, you do what you can with what you have access to on the street. I think they're doing a good job. They're there. From what I know, they're handing out flyers. They're on site. They're talking to people, and and from the family side of it, that's probably one of the best things they can be doing at this point in time.
So many comments. People are asking, why have we not heard more from the boyfriend? From what has been reported, the boyfriend did catch that connecting flight. Hannah was going to visit an aunt in upstate New York, and the boyfriend was heading to a similar direction. Mossberg mom, who I know from the Sarah Boone trial, and I saw in the chat says, I got to look at the boyfriend. I'm sure they've got to look at everybody. Back to the father for a minute. The family, once it was discovered that he had reportedly jumped from this parking garage, the family put out a statement. I'm just going to read it super fast, saying, the Kobayashi family endured a devastating tragedy today after tirelessly searching throughout Los Angeles for 13 days. Hannah's father, Ryan Kobayashi, tragically took his own life. This loss has compounded the family's suffering immeasurably. What the family needs most in this difficult time is for all communities to rally around them with support, compassion, prayers. Please be considerate with your comments. It goes on a few more lines. But Nako, to you, you said this before, but will the LAPD, now that this is so high profile, do they have to prioritize it? Do they have to start get a little more like front facing to the media, forward facing, and start addressing these questions about what's going on? Because everyone's got a bazillion questions. Miranda Lee, how can you say I ignore you? I don't ignore you. Go ahead, Nako.
Yes, they just LAPD just got a great new chief of police, Jim McDonnell, and I know he hits the ground running. So this is like the first like really big media thing I believe that he's going to be hit with. So I'm sure that they're going to dedicate as much resources as possible, and the best way to do that is through their robbery homicide division. But in the meantime, when you're talking about all that data dump via all these surveillance cameras that are everywhere and everything else that's digital, what the FBI brings with their analysts is amazing, because unlike TV where they show all these analysts going through all this data, my better half works homicide down at South Central Division, and they have 0 analysts. Same for missing persons unit. So the detective not only has to interview and try to collect this data by pulling these videos, which it's long, it's a heavy lift. Then someone has to analyze that, and you only have they work 10-hour days plus overtime, so they have to do a dual role, not only pulling it and extracting it, but then trying to analyze that. And then you compound it with all these systems have different software issues, which LAPD may or may not have access to. So you have to always overcome information ITD type issues, and so there's a myriad of obstacles that they're facing right now, and the best way of combating that is through things like this, using weaponizing or be collaborating, I should say, with social media and the press and cyber sleuths and what have you, and try to set up a tip line and extract information from the public, because they have way more resources and less rules and regulations than the police department does. So that's another thing that they have to do. And that usually happens in these cases. They have set up a tip line, and then someone has to go through all those. So the detectives don't have time to sit on a Skid Row cam and just look for chance encounters of it, but someone at home can. So that's a huge force multiplier right now. And there was intel saying that she was seen with a man. My fear is someone that might be mentally not there, and that's thrust into a new city that they're unfamiliar with. These predators are out there. They have an uncanny ability of spotting the weak link, and a solo female, especially traversing the city via the public transportation, like LA, Metro, their subways and buses. It's not like Chicago or New York or Boston. It's more the socioeconomic population that's in there is very, very low. So there's a ton of homeless people and criminals, and mixed in with very few commuters and all that. So a single female that's presentable, that obviously looks like she doesn't belong, is sticking out like a sore thumb for these predators are out there. And usually all these cases, all roads lead to it's usually the Skid Row, Hollywood, or Venice Beach. And obviously it looks like it's seeping down to Skid Row. And I worked down there for, a good majority of my career. Nothing good ends up there. So I'm very fearful of who she's linking up with right now.
Yeah, she's been seen with unidentified people who are better known as strangers on a Skid Row cam. So I'm sure police are analyzing that. I'm just wondering, Nako, since you're there in LA, I mean, is this getting more coverage on the local news? Are you seeing flyers? Do you think it's at a point where people are looking around for her? Because that might be the people who end up finding her.
That would be, I'm putting my bets on the public, and of kind of, if she's out there, of tracking her down. And but then again, it's common for some of these people, just to go off the rails, and then when you pull the string and look back at their family relations, and it's a troubled past, and they're like, yeah, I'm turning off my phone, I'm going on airplane mode, and I don't want to talk to anyone. There's a reason why I'm traveling. So that's also something to look into. Like, what were her real travel plans? What was her real destinations, and what did she want to accomplish? And the thing with flying, that provokes so much anxiety and fear for so many people. So you mix that with a couple of these different ingredients that she's being faced with, and it has a recipe for disaster.
And just to be clear, we don't know what, if anything, she took on this flight, but this is something that investigators are certainly going to be asking themselves. Just a little bit more about the boyfriend. I see my friend Bree in the chat saying that the ex taking a trip together with her is strange. So just a little bit more about that. They had this trip planned. This is according to Hannah's sister, Sydney, that they were going to visit this aunt in upstate New York. They break up after booking the flights, which is definitely a little unusual, but they then agree, which is even more unusual, to go on the trip separately. So they're literally on this flight together, but they reportedly sat apart and did not speak to each other, which brings me to Marvin's question. Can police request the airline, give the manifest, or if airline can ask passengers if they noticed anything unusual in the 5-hour flight? Nako is not a rookie. He knows what he's doing, and investigators always talk about a timeline. So, Rob D'Amico, are you going back in time to this flight, or even before the flight, to see what was happening, or at least what was happening on this flight?
Yeah, so I definitely going to interview people who sat next to him. So anytime you have something that happens in a flight, you can figure out who sat next to him, and at this point you're going to have to cold call him and just say, do you remember any conversations? Was there any interaction? The other thing I thought up, did she just have carry-on bags or check bags? So if she had check bags, then that one bag still probably made it on the next flight or is in the airport system. Looking at what she took for this flight, may give some indications. Again, it's one of those things that you really intend to go to upstate New York. Depends what's in her bags. I mean, it's cold there. She's coming from Hawaii, type of thing. So all that has to start happening. Again, it's a big case. And one of my super fans, Val out there, who's from UK, and her daughter, Lauren, I know is watching, but she asked how important it is that professionals from different agencies work together. And I think it's huge. As he mentioned before, the Bureau can throw so many just people at things. Like, we don't get paid overtime most of the time, and we have a lot of people. So when you bring us in, we can throw the analysts at it. We have software. After the Boston bombing, we really got good at taking videos that people send to us and identifying people through facial recognition and other things. So again, as this starts taking that momentum, let some of the federal agencies take that burden off of the local detectives and such, that they're doing one thing, but you all have to stay in your lane, so you're not duplicating effort in that. But that's the way it's going to happen. But LAPD has to find a way to kind of invite the feds in, because right now there's no kind of federal nexus in that. And if there's overstate something, the cyber stuff does bring that in, though. If they were doing cyber crimes, if they scammed her out of money, that automatically really brings in the feds, because of the internet and how just internet data goes cross state lines, that we can get involved. So hopefully that's going on. And then a task force starts looking at, hey, you do this. And the detectives are just running all these leads down.
Yeah. Rob, do you think that she knows people are looking for her, Rob, if you had a guess?
I think she has to. Again, it's one of those, if she decided to do all this shopping and stuff between it, she wanted to stay in LA and she did this and then met up with somebody. The texts are indications, like, but you really have to look at, was it someone telling her to text something? Because that can happen a lot. But I think the one thing where she said she was scammed out of money, like all her funds from someone she thought she loved, was odd. Because if it was an absolute stranger, well, where does that come in? That kind of pointed me towards maybe the boyfriend or something. But again, he made that second flight. I think it's easy to get his whereabouts. Did he fly back to LA? I'm not there yet. But that one comment kind of made it odd that someone she thought she loved, where we're all looking at the stranger. But again, this is where the detectives are just going through this, interviewing all her friends. Who did she talk to? What was she up to? And then looking at other texts in her phone or other communication when they start getting that data.
Once again, Mossberg Mom says, my money's on the X. My gut is never wrong. We'll see, Mossberg Mom. But Nick here says, the fact that the luggage, by the way, he's in upstate New York, said to be cooperating, and she's been around since he's arrived in New York. So not sure what the connection there is. But the fact that the luggage was returned to her days later is a big red flag for me. If Hannah intended to go to New York City, why didn't she catch another flight to the city? Approximately 50 flights a day. I mean, these are the types of questions. And Doug, correct me if I'm wrong. Are these the sorts of questions you're asking yourself when you're doing this investigation? And we know that she leaves LAX on November 8th, and then she's at the Grove, which, by the way, I had a book signing there recently. It's a really nice kind of outdoor shopping area with a giant Barnes and Nobles, but it's like a hangout spot with a movie theater, restaurants. So she's seen there on the 9th and the 10th. Doug, are you, if you're working this case, are you physically going out to these spots and seeing what they look like for yourself, for ingress, egress, all these sorts of things, to possibilities of where she could have headed from there?
If I have to, definitely. I work with two very good private investigators who are great at this thing. So they would probably be boots on the ground first, but anytime I can get on site, I do. Looking at her itinerary, I saw on a couple news channels that there was some handwritten notes that may have been hers, may not. I'm not sure. One was an outline and one was a bucket list. I'm not sure if those were hers or not. So all this stuff has to be confirmed. Who was she going to work for and see? I know she was staying with her aunt in New York, but who was the company that she was going to go do the job for, the photography for? And what do they have to say? What role do they have to play, if any? Her activities in LA, of everything she did in LA, I can tell you that, in my opinion, she was in her complete right mind when she went to the bookstore. And these are things like I look up every little detail, the routes, the locations, everything. And this bookstore, I don't know if Taskin or Tashin, I'm not sure.
Yeah. I don't know how to pronounce it.
Yeah. But it's a very niche little bookstore, very artistic. It specializes in books, photography books, which she is interested in. And this bookstore only exists in the biggest cities in the world: Paris, Rome, Cologne. There's one in Hollywood, and then there's one in LA.
They're like, I think they're like big coffee table picture, but it's TASCHEN. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But there's none in New York. New York City doesn't have one. So it makes sense that she would detour in LA, try to find time if she can, to go to this bookstore. So she was probably in her right mind when she went there. And when she went there, she probably found out about the LeBron James event. But, regardless of what state of mind she was in, I think she was in her right state of mind when she did go to the bookstore. I think that was a point of interest for her. And then from there, it looks like she went back to the airport to try and sort out her next move.
Did he leave a note? I'm assuming this is the father, and I don't know that we have an answer to that. Nako, if he did leave a note in this particular case, would law enforcement reveal what it said, or would they keep that close to the vest in light of what's happening here?
Yeah, those are the holdbacks that you can't release everything that, in a case to, you need certain things when people come up to you and offer information that you could verify whether it's legit or not. And that, that's definitely something you want to keep close to the chest and not reveal all your cards for sure.
Yeah. By the way, again, she's not the only one. You heard Nako say that there's like 2 to 3 missing persons detectives in the entire LAPD. But Ida Shaw, friend of the show, always here, 38-year-old Los Angeles resident, Phaedra Walker, has been missing since late July 2024. The Black and Missing Foundation offers crucial support to families of missing loved ones. Please help and donate. Let's not forget that there's other people out there. But I guess not go back to you on this one again, and I sort of was asking you about it before, but when does something become high profile in the sense that you've got this new police commissioner breathing down people's necks saying we got to find this person because the media is going crazy with it and we're looking bad?
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of police action and enforcement gets driven by the media, or nowadays social media, and so the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So does that make it fair to all these other people that don't have missing people, loved ones, or got killed, or vanished, or have issues just because it didn't make the news? Yeah, absolutely. Life is not fair, and so these cases get pushed up and they get triaged by media importance because the mayor and all these other elected officials and everyone else that wants to make a name for themselves, they could do that via these cases. So that's what happens when it's very common in all the major cities, and these things get pushed up in order. So, the thing that I find intriguing, I would like to, I was wondering if myself, I would, looking at her social media, even though her phone's off, is she still accessing her social media? Because as you know, everyone's addicted to these devices and to social media, especially if you're in your 20s and 30s. And to be off those platforms for a day or two, that's like detoxing from a drug itself for a lot of people. So I'd be really interested to see where that investigation is. And in the meantime, myself, she still has to eat, she has to sleep. Where is she doing those things? Without reservations, previously making reservations. She's staying at somebody's house, or she's staying at, some of these low-end hotels, SROs, and what have you, down in Skid Row or in Hollywood, or a place like, in Venice. So that's where I'm checking if I'm having my guys' boots on the ground. All these transportation hubs where a lot of people loiter, and bars, and various drug locations, especially if she get linked up with people that she doesn't know. Usually it's all drug related. So that's where I'm pouring my resources, with handing out flyers and trying to track her down.
With the social media, it actually can also be, we had a kidnapping in Kabul, Afghanistan. 2 professors were kidnapped, and the family was very involved, but they kept seeing on Facebook Messenger that person was going green. So they kept thinking that person was online. So they kept hitting up their FBI link back here, calling me in Afghanistan. And when we ran it down, we finally got someone at Facebook to tell us, like, when you're on link, or when you're on Messenger, and then you go off it for a while, they constantly kind of send pings out to see that if you're active, to get you to, the whole thing is about getting online and staying online type of thing. So they're constantly trying to reach back to the last IP you were at to see if you're there to come up. And what they were telling us is when they do that, it would put you on green on Messenger to make it look like you were online, but you actually weren't. It was your last IP that they pinged. And it really caused us a lot of frustration with the families, because they're saying, hey, he's online somewhere. And we're like, we literally sent a team of Afghan special forces into where the last IP was. And in their internet structure. They knocked down a wall to find this IP, and it was just blank. And but it took a lot of time. But after that, so it's one of those things. It's you look at it and you try to use it that way, but there's little things that can throw you that you didn't even know about on how some of these social media things work.
This is an interesting comment. The sister said the dad was very distraught when he saw what train station she got off in the last video. Maybe it was the person she was with that upset him. But Rob, just back to you before I move on to Doug. The family was asking the FBI for their involvement here. Is the FBI involved? Would they get involved? I mean, I obviously their digital forensics are, pretty damn good. So what would they be doing?
So there's a couple ways FBI can get involved in. First one, if LAPD asks them, some of the bigger departments don't ask as much just because they have resources themselves. But if there's something specific about it, they can ask the federal agencies to help them. With this one, the nexus of a federal crime really gets into the cyber. So once that started coming out that there was some cyber, some possibly scams, or someone got their money, identity theft, that can go into the realm of a federal case. The FBI is not going to take it over. We used to do that. And, all the movies like Die Hard, made fun of us. And some of it was true. But nowadays, it's really a good working relationship where they have the case and we just go in and say, what do you need from us? What can we help with? And again, it's being able to throw 10 analysts at something. It's being able to really move on this video and start doing some of the things that we do. Or if they find a iPhone that's locked, even though LAPD has some good techs, the Bureau has a real high, if they have to, sending it back to lab at Quantico and getting into a locked iPhone is possible. It's tough, but they have their ways to do it, and some other stuff. So it's one of those where we'll try to find a way. The FBI doesn't pressure as much into, like, we don't have elected officials. Like, elected officials can really stir up the pressure on stuff, but the FBI wants to help. So if they have the ability, the manpower and stuff, they're going to throw out what they can based on LAPD saying, hey, look, we really need, this is going away. We need some help here. I'm sure they're going to, be able to assist in that.
Doug McGregor. I mean, I'm just thinking, like, what could be going on in her mind, which I'm sure investigators are trying to ask themselves. But so she's seen again at the Grove this November 9th and 10th. And then the 11th is the last day the family hears from her on her public Instagram account. She's attending a Nike event. This is a LeBron James thing at the Grove. And she's even spotted, Doug, on a stranger's YouTube video about this event. And then later that day, she heads back to LAX, but does not board a flight. I mean, to me, this just makes no sense. Does it make any sense to you? And again, like, I'm just wondering, all these movements, between the Grove, Skid Row, LAX, why do you think she's going back to LAX if she's not meaning to get on a flight?
I think she's trying to figure it out. I think the LeBron James event, the Nike event, was a time filler, possibly. And I think she's trying to figure out, and I mean, it is possible that she was scammed and her tickets got affected, her money got affected, and she's trying to sort that all out without going to the family. I know a member of her family, maybe the aunt, put out a statement that said she reached out to them and asked, if she needs money, can she have it? So there was something along that line. And she was told, of course, if you need it. So it does sound like there was some kind of money issue going on. I think identifying this person, I mean, I've seen rumors online, I don't know if it's true or not, that the family knows who that person is that she was seen with. That might not be true at all. But I think, identifying that person is a critical next step for law enforcement, and they'll be working hard to do that. The trafficking angle, I I see it quite frequently. I've seen it twice before where, a young woman goes missing, and trafficking's the first kind of thing that comes up in the family's mind. And I mean, trafficking's a big issue. It's out there. It happens. We all know that. But it also, I find that families can sometimes raise the trafficking issue because, it's better than death, right? And this family hasn't talked about the possibility that she's not alive anymore. So, it kind of, keeps that hope going that she's still alive, which I think is important for the family to believe that she's still alive, and she could very well be still alive. And trafficking's one angle, but it's not where you're going to focus the investigation unless you have proof of it. And the family is also finding hope in psychics as well. I saw that they're speaking with psychics, and that's fine. People have those beliefs. So whatever the family can do to keep that hope alive that she's going to come home, I think is important for them as well.
Yeah, well said. Tanya, surviving the survivor at Gmail. If you can email me this, I'd appreciate it. Surviving the survivor at Gmail. Her right forearm, she's got a tattoo inside next to her wrist. It's a dagger going through a heart, black and red, about 3 to 4 inches long. It is pretty far back in her Instagram. Please share what it looks like. So if anyone in LA sees something remotely similar to that, please call authorities. Just piggybacking on this notion of trafficking, we're 56 minutes into it and haven't talked about it really, Nako. You hear the phrase sex trafficking all the time. And admittedly, I'm a little ignorant about the entire subject, but how would you know whether or not to investigate this as a possible trafficking crime?
You don't, but that's one of the avenues you have to do, especially when someone is from a different city and they are using the public transportation system. And like I was saying, these predators are out there, pimps, drug dealers, drug users. They just have this innate ability to spot vulnerable people and exploit that, whether it's for sex, whether it's for taking them of money, of resources. It starts very small of, hey, you look like you're lost, you need some directions. And then it escalates, little by little. It's kind of the grooming them for something. So if she had a car or she was actually staying someplace that was concrete, maybe there's a little bit of less of that, but someone that's on their own and that's navigating the city is very vulnerable for that. So that's definitely something that's high up on the list that needs to be considered for sure.
Yo, Nako, what about this? Kalisa Katz, 30-year-old women are not being trafficked. It's not logical. Do you agree with that?
I mean, it's a little older, definitely on the spectrum. It's usually, teenagers I've seen and early 20s, but, she looks very young. So, and she's, living in Hawaii, it's a different atmosphere. It's different. It's very friendly over there, that aloha spirit's a real thing. So that's something that could easily be taken advantage of. So if these guys see an opportunity, they're going to exploit it by all means. So it's something to definitely be looked at.
I think the problem is when you say, oh, it can't happen to a 30-year-old, then you ignore, like a good detective's not going to ignore evidence. You can't really, that's why I'm suspect about profiling. Like when we were looking for the DC snipers and they said it was a white guy and is, 35, and it just made you focus only on that. And that's where, you have to keep your eyes open, because just because it's not normal doesn't mean it didn't happen in this case. So you really have to allow, as a lot of your guests say, the evidence has to take you down that road. If you have evidence of something, you kind of have to follow it, and you can't keep your eyes closed and say, oh, they don't traffic 30-year-olds. She could have been a very, again, coming from Hawaii. How many times has she been to the mainland? How experienced is she? How old does she look? All those things come into it. And then if they got her to someplace and they got her on drugs, then it comes into how can they exploit that? It's one of those things. They are, as Nako said, they're gifted at manipulation, and that's why they're good at it. And who knows what started happening if they took her out for a drink and then did the drugs in her drink and then just used her for something along those lines. So you can never say not when you have an investigation, because you close a door that shouldn't be closed.
Yeah, Nako, back to you. Miranda Lee, why isn't law enforcement sharing the surveillance video of who she was with on the train if you're looking for the public's help? But why not share that?
The police department has, they have 100 different cases going on at once. And, whether it's, wanted criminals, missing people, things that they're just putting out on their own, officer-involved shootings, uses of force thing. It all depends on what's going on in the zeitgeist. So their media relations people have to put out certain things, and it all ultimately it gets thrown back to the investigator. Do they want that thrown out? Do they think that's going to compromise something? Do they think that's going to flood their system, their tip line with too many false leads? Who knows? But they're going to get criticized no matter what if they put out too much information, not enough. But like I said, it could go back to just a resources thing. We have zero analysts, have very few detectives, and they're chasing down so many leads, and so much comes in a high profile case like that. But it definitely is frustrating from a viewer and for a family member. Is like, how come you're not, putting out something 24/7? So there's an array of interesting reasons why that gets play and why it doesn't.
Especially if the family says they know who it was. So if they don't have to ID them, if they've ID'd them, then you probably don't want it released because you want to do certain things in a covert manner without him knowing that you know who he is. So that always comes up to me is like, hey, if they don't need the public to ID him, and it is a decision at one point, if they don't know who he is, they'll talk about it, say, all right, is it time to open this up? Because what ends up happening is, America's Most Wanted was a great show, but when I worked fugitives for the FBI, Saturday nights, like, okay, you're going to get 80 calls that they know this person all around the country, and you have to check every one of them out because one of them could be true. But you do waste. I don't want to say waste, but there's a lot of resources to do that. So you kind of have to calculate, all right, we're going to open up this huge can of worms for 1,000 leads to come in that we then have to sort through if you already have the information that you need.
Yeah.
The bishop here is saying that she did not get on that plane to New York intentionally. Of course, that's hypothetical speculation, saying that she planned this. We don't know. Aloha. The aunt spoke publicly about after viewing the footage, the surveillance footage, she believes she's in imminent danger. What do you believe they saw? Doug, I'm assuming if you have the chance to look at surveillance video, you're looking at it, but what are you doing with it from your perspective?
Looking for, everything in it, not just what you can see, but what's, what digital evidence you can pull from it as well. But, if she believed that she was in imminent danger, there must be a good reason. I mean, you don't think that just because you see somebody with another person, I don't think most of us are gonna believe that. So either she didn't like the way this person looked, or she knew who this person was. One thing that really stands out to me, I sort of alluded to it before, but it goes back to Nako mentioning that she's from Hawaii, and what people from that culture are like, and is that this was her first contract, her first photography contract. And I don't know if that's coincidental or not, but that really makes you vulnerable. If you've been working your entire life for something, and all of a sudden you get this massive opportunity to fly from Hawaii to New York City on your first contract, it seems a little out of the realm of, it doesn't seem realistic. You don't have any photography experience. You haven't done any professional jobs, and we're going to fly you out to New York City. It just seems a little unbelievable to me. And I would be looking into that route of investigation immediately and seeing who that was that contacted her, and what they, and the discussions with that company or person.
That's very interesting. I'm glad you brought that up. So she has an aunt named Larry Pigeon. One of Hannah's aunts, she talks to USA Today. She says that on November 11th, which is the last day they heard from her, they start getting texts. These are the texts that Rob's been talking about, saying that she was telling them that she didn't feel safe, that someone was trying to steal her funds, that someone was trying to take her identity, and she was using words that she wouldn't typically use, like babe, the word babe. Nako, investigators in your world, that's what you guys call a clue. I mean, maybe it was somebody texting from her phone that wasn't her, if they're using language that you wouldn't use. But I don't know. What do you do with these text messages?
Yeah, it's really, you and I read something and it's not an anomaly, but then someone else reads it and it sends some red flags. So I mean, it takes hours of debriefing someone just to find out what their background is, to see what their mental capacities are, what's their relationship with that person. Do they jump to the worst? Are they a pessimist? Are they opposite of that? Are they positive people? How do they interpret things? And so it's really tough with witnesses. That they're really good if you have them, but then sometimes they could be your worst enemy and it's sending you down rabbit holes that aren't there, especially in something that's a highly emotional thing, such as this, where, especially now with, Pops, unaliving himself. So you don't know what their mental condition is and how they're interpreting life. So it's really tough to deal with. It's a lot to digest. And I mean, you have to, it's kind of like dating, you have to really get to know someone before you can really assign a value to what the information that they've given you. So,
one thing that this goes back to, I have 4 children, and you worry about them, especially when they travel, but we have duress words. So if a certain word comes up, that means they're under duress. Something is wrong.
I love it. That's what happens when your dad's an FBI agent. I'm gonna pick this up.
Yeah. So, but also they're like, we have with AI out there, there's a lot of, like, they're starting to use AI to fraud funds and voices. Like your child says, send me $2,000 right away. I also have questions, like if we talk about, and I don't want to give too much of it away, but the answers to our questions are actually false, because you can find out so much in false media. Say, like, okay, what was your first pet? I can probably find out the name of your first pet on Facebook. So our code is the wrong answer is the right answer, so to speak. And again, I guess it's having a paranoid father who's seen so much. But if you really say our first pet's name, that's not the correct answer. It's a false one that everyone knows, that if you say that, then I know it's my child. And then again, if you say a certain word, I know you're under distress, and everything that's coming after that is, I'm now going to, and frankly, it's sad, but with AI and everything else coming out and what's going on, you guys need this. Cause if she had text and threw in the duress word in there, then you would know certainly that she has the capability to do it, and she's saying she's in trouble, so to speak. But as your kids travel, I bought all my kids extra air tags I tell them to put it in their pocket, have at least one in their pocket, because if someone grabs your phone, I can still locate you. Put one in your luggage and all this other stuff, because air tags can work even without your phone being next to them. And they use other iPhones and such to locate it. But there's little tricks you can do traveling now to start protecting yourselves.
Wow. Fred and Ethel, my pug and boxer, have air tags, but maybe my real kid should have them. But that's actually amazing advice, Rob. I'm going to come up with a code word for my kids. They already think I'm crazy that I work in the true crime world.
Yeah, Rob, my dad and I had one when I was a kid who came up with it was a code phrase, and it was bizarre. So, what's the secret to steel wool? It was when I would help him clean dishes. And he said, the secret to steel wool is very little water. So, as a kid, I'm soaking it with water and nothing's getting off. And so it kind of became a catchphrase to establish our bona fides if something did go wrong.
Yeah.
You'd ask, what's the
was he former military government? Because that's what you use in the government. you have a bunch of answers to questions so that if you are kidnapped and a rescue force comes in, before they put you on a helicopter, they'll do there's a couple movies that show it, what was your first car or something. And if you answer correctly, then it's you, so to speak. So that comes back and paranoid fathers and such. It like, again, with AI now, it's even becoming more so. And then I just decided again to do the wrong answer so that you can't just look on my, have AI look into my background to figure out what the, first pet's name was.
Yes, yeah, he was a U.S. Army Ranger, so you hit it on the head.
Thank you for his service. These text messages continue, and I promise, because Nako is new and he doesn't maybe know, we go about an hour and 15, hour and 20 minutes, another like 5-10 minutes, but this is a fascinating case. Doug, to you, she also texts a friend separately that she was scared and that she couldn't come back home or something. That's according to her sister, Sydney. And she goes on to say, she's speaking here, by the way, to Hawaii News Now. She says it was just really weird text. It doesn't sound like her. Like there's just something off about it. So I wasn't too sure. I don't know if it's her or if someone else was texting. And then one of the text messages reads, "Deep hackers wiped my identity, stole all of my funds, and have had me on a mind F since Friday." Doug, you're when you hear that, what's running through your brain as an investigator? Because to me, it sounds like either she's losing it or someone is really messing with her.
Yeah, I would deep dive into this and find out, is this normal behavior for her? Is she somebody who's paranoid, somebody who's into conspiracies at all? Is this who she is just as a normal person? And maybe she's texted something like this before, but if it's not, then why is she texting this, assuming it's her? But then you also have to look at let's look at it on the other side and say, for example, it's, hypothetically, it's not her texting. Why would somebody that's, abducted her or taken her phone be texting this? A financial text makes sense. Hey, I'm stuck in LA. Please send money, right? They send money, they get the money. But if it's not about money, what's the motive behind sending those texts if you're not her? So I guess you just have to really find out from her friends and family, is this normal behavior for her? And what may lead us to believe it's her or somebody else.
Yeah, Rob D'Amico from Lascara here. A lot of people have brought this up, that she always texted in emojis, which is another reason that these people thought the texts were off. But the one about the deep hackers, this, again, I'll read it. "Deep hackers wiped my identity, stole all of my funds, and have had me on a mind F since Friday." I mean, that just sounds like, something out of a, I don't know, a movie, which is a cliche for news people to use, but it just seems so like scripted. It seems like so LA just in its nature. But where would you go with that particular message?
Well, you said you start going to the phone data. Who sent it? Like I said, all this digital information now makes it so that you can start looking into things. Like, how did she get that text? Where did it come from? Where was the phone located when it happened and stuff? So again, as all that goes on, it's leaving small breadcrumbs, but they're breadcrumbs that they can start going into and looking at. And that's like, like people think like Bitcoin is like, oh, great, because you can't track it. You can track it very well. It's digital, and they have the resources to do it. So it's one of those things like, if the phone just went off and away and never came on again, that's a bigger problem, because you're now out there. When did you can look at all the other texts to friends and stuff? When did this switch happen? And then trying to locate that phone when it happened, and what maybe was going on when you look at like the map up there. When did the first odd text come in, so to speak? Or could have been at that point she was being drugged and just wasn't texting normally. But just keeping that open mind as you look at all of it and what does it mean. And then I'm sure detectives are going back and forth talking about how they see it, because everyone's perspective is so different. And that's when you get more people involved, everyone may have something, and you get, hey, I remember one time this happened, and that's where you go down and you get that one lead that leads to something.
Now, Rob, you got me thinking about code words for my kids here, but Angie, my kids are at the Miami Museum of Ice Cream right now, in case anybody is jealous. Which, by the way, there's always a mile-long line to get in for. But did her father leave a note? This came up earlier in the show before unaliving himself. Strange text from Hannah. Has dad entangled in something bad and irreversible? Again, these are all questions I'm sure we're asking, but also investigators. Here's one last quote from the aunt. Again, her name is Lair Pigeon. We're trying to take us seriously. She's talking about law enforcement, because it's been at this point 11 days. Just because, and here's the important part, just because she does not have a mental illness and just because she's not elderly does not mean something didn't happen to her. So the family believes that, unless it was some sort of psychotic break, but she didn't have a history, obviously, of mental illness. By the way, she was last seen wearing black leggings, a tie-dye sweatshirt, and a green backpack. I guess this is as good a place as any to just kind of get our final thoughts here. By the way, we're talking about unaliving here, and I always like to put this in the discussion. If someone is struggling, you never know who is or how badly. The number is 800-273-TALK, 800-273-TALK if you need to speak to someone. That hotline saves lives. There's no doubt about it. Let me see here. We'll start with Doug McGregor, better known as the Geo Profiler, coming to a YouTube channel near you soon on our second channel. He is a forensic behavioral analyst and a consultant specializing in geographic profiling and linkage analysis. He says out because he's from Ottawa, Canada. He's a Canadian. Doug, we're going to stay on this, by the way. We're going to do this tomorrow, but what do you do now?
I can leave you with two things. First thing, for the family's investigation, it would be a good idea for them to hire a private investigator. In my experience, law enforcement are fantastic at what they do. They do a great job, but there's a lot of people that also won't talk to law enforcement for a number of reasons. So having a private investigator that doesn't care about any of those reasons is a good thing. So, finding a good private investigator, starting at the place last seen, which is Pico Station on surveillance camera, as far as we know from the public point of view, and starting their search there. The last thing I'm going to leave you with, which is, a bit more morbid, but there's only one situation where I would unalive myself if my child had gone missing, and that's if there was a ransom note. I'm not sure what it's like in the US, but in Canada, life insurance has a 2-year unaliving clause. After that, everything's paid out. So if there was a ransom note, that's the only situation where I would ever consider that as a parent. But that's not to judge, because, everybody struggles with their own issues internally.
That's fascinating. Something I would never have even thought about it. But that's why these guys are investigators. And I'm not. Very glad to have him as a first-time best guest. Jim, I hope you'll come back. It is Jim Nako Nolan, born and bred in New York City in the 70s. He wanted to be a police officer to make a difference. And not only was he a police officer for the NYPD, he was also one for the LAPD. He was a detective in the Special Victims Unit, as well as many other divisions throughout his storied career. Nako, will you come back? And your final thoughts here?
Well, thanks, Mom, for writing that bio for me. And yeah, I'd love to. I love collaborating with, I worked with the FBI and the Joint Terrorism Task Force. So it's always great hearing their perspective and working with civilians coming out with different perspectives. such as yourself, and with geofencing and all that stuff. So I love hearing those different angles and being a part of that. So yeah, thank you for having me, and I'd love to come back.
Awesome. As far as this investigation, where do you think it heads now?
I was thinking about dating apps. I was wondering if she, usually when people are out of romantic relationship and they're traveling somewhere new, I've had friends where they just start this dating app, and they start put their location of whatever city they're in, and that could bring on an onslaught of issues, especially as someone that's emotionally fragile, where usually that happens in a breakup and they're seeking attention. So that's definitely something I'd like to find out, if she had any history of online dating, which is so common nowadays, especially for someone in their 20s and 30s. So something romantic, that's someone that people were alluding to catfishing, taking advantage of her state that she was in, and vulnerable and seeking attention, and like I said, that Hawaiian good spirit of community and relationships. So it's going to be personality driven, and it's someone that's trying to exploit her. That's where I'm feeling it.
Well, you have a safe trip back to New York on the red eye. Last but not least, you got Rob D'Amico, who's also coming to a YouTube channel near you very shortly. He served his country for 39 years. He was in the military and then a special agent with the FBI, doing all sorts of wild things. He was part of the HRT, the hostage rescue team, as well. Rob D'Amico, this comment here: the father unaliving himself before he finds out what happened to his daughter. Something about that, as a parent, and you said it yourself, definitely seems. Oh, look at this. Do you know Dr. Shiloh? LA Not So Confidential, Nako with the exclamation mark. Dr. Shiloh was actually going to maybe come on today, but couldn't. But Rob D'Amico, this is a weird circumstance in this case. This made it take a very strange turn.
It does, but just because it's odd doesn't mean that it's not, it's not happening. We talked about, closing your eyes to something if the, evidence isn't showing that, and you definitely don't want to do that. But I've stopped trying to judge on how other people act when something happens. I've seen unbelievable things all around the world, and everyone acts differently, and I don't judge them for the way they acted. And I certainly don't say, oh, that's evidence of this. Not that you don't, well, it's a little odd, let me look into it, but you don't want to go down a rabbit hole thinking, oh, this is odd. And then you're closing, because when you do that, you start putting the blinders on to other stuff that makes sense that you want to open up. But again, as Nako said, like, just this panel has 4 different perspectives that are great to look at. And you're like, oh, damn, that's right. Like, he said that's pretty good. And that's really where these cases get solved is collaboration amongst them is really big. And it's funny, he mentioned the dating apps, and I had a client that son was basically kidnapped in Colombia, went on a dating app, and the girl said, oh, I'm going to send you an Uber or whatever the driving service is down there to bring you to meet me. And it wasn't a real Uber. She said she was coming in an Uber. She showed up with this Uber. He gets in. They drive 2 blocks. The quote Uber stops. She gets out, and 2 more guys come in, and he's kidnapped. So it's one of those things, again, when you just assume certain things, if someone else has control of a situation, you think it's an Uber, and it's not. That things can happen that way. Everyone wants to go to another country, hook up on a dating app, and then the predators know this, and that's what they're looking for.
And apparently LAX has got, and I go there often because my wife's from LA, but apparently they've got trafficking signs everywhere. I always learn a lot on the shows, not because of me, but because of the guests. And I'm definitely talking to my kids when they get home from the.
Well, it's the famous, what was that Liam Neeson movie where his daughter's trafficked in Paris? Is it
Taken?
Yeah, Taken. I always told my kids, like, I'd be the guy in Taken, but I'd be a lot more violent. But that's what it is. They are professionals at that, unfortunately.
Yeah. Best guest in true crime. Appreciate it. We will get Nako back on because he's got a cool name. Nako, so you do know Dr. Shiloh, I take it.
Yeah, I consider her a great friend and like a little sister. She's has an awesome podcast, and she's just a good-hearted, amazing human being and a subject matter expert in an array of awesome topics.
Yeah, she's awesome. We're going to get her back on, and we'll get her on with you. If you haven't checked it out, LA Not So Confidential is her podcast. Nako, do you have a show or a podcast? Anything we could promote?
No, I've got a shit show at home here right now. I'm in the midst of tenting my house here and for insects, but no, I'm on a hiatus right now with my podcast. But might be kicking something off in the new year, but
All right.
nonetheless.
We'll have to talk to you because we're starting a second channel with a lot of our best guests. So I'll talk to you offline about that. Guests, stick around for 1 second. Love you, America. My homage to Geraldo. That's the kids. Love you, Florida, where Rob and I are. Ottawa, Canada, where the geoprofiler is. And, of course, Los Angeles, which is where Nako is, but also where they're looking for Hana Kobayashi. Let's keep her father and she in our thoughts. And hopefully they will find her soon enough. By the way, I'm a little reluctant to do this, but I think we're covering Karen Reed in the morning, the good old Karen Reed story out of Boston. So we're going to be doing that. And then I think we're staying on this tomorrow afternoon. So we'll see you. And I'll post on Twitter at Podcast STS, Instagram, Surviving the Survivor. Love y'all.